Call to order the November 8th, 2019 Landscape Architects Technical Committee. It's 9:30 a.m. Vice Chair Andrew Bowden, will you please call the roll?
Mark Trescott.
Present.
Andrew Bowden, present. Susan Landry.
Present.
Patricia Trouth.
Present.
John Roshinsky.
Present.
We have a full board, or full committee, and a quorum.
Excellent. I'd like to advise the public members here that you can sign in. There's a sign-in list prior at the door. It's optional. If you do sign in, you will be recorded on the official minutes as being in attendance. I'd like to advise the LATC of voting requirements. All motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. I'd like to also announce that we'll be having a lunch break around 11:45-ish today, and we'll take a brief break for that lunchtime. Also, I'd like to make a personal kind of report that I have been attending the Landscape Stakeholders Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance meetings that happened for a couple years ago, and it recently reestablished itself. It's a Department of Water Resources effort. DWR is maintaining and holding these meetings. It's regarding the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance and updates. At one time, we were hoping to have an update for this cycle of changes with the Green Building Code, but it did not happen. There was a webinar held on November 4th from 8:30 to approximately noon. And in general, it was just a briefing of what had happened previously, discussion, a couple reports on research that DWR is doing in terms of implementation surveys with land use agencies that govern. One of the issues that came up during this effort was the fact that unfortunately a lot of the agencies, although mandated to have a water ordinance, didn't have the funding or the staffing to actually implement it. So DWR is going through an effort of surveying and trying to understand what the agencies need in order to activate it and utilize it in the fashion that it was set up for. And at the end of the call, there was discussion about reestablishing the work groups. I think there were 8 different work groups looking at different subjects and progressing the effort forward. And in essence, that's kind of a nutshell of what the webinar was about. And all are welcome to join in. I will continue to monitor it kind of for our effort and report back as things happen. Okay, on to our next item. Public comment not on the agenda. If anybody would like to, in the audience, like to address the committee at this time on issues that are not on the agenda, please identify yourself. This is voluntary, and it will be recorded into the minutes. Any input? Okay. Item D, update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. Trish.
So included in the packet is a letter we received from DCA regarding the update, DCA update. And I just wanted to note 2 things. The first being the appointment of the new DCA director on October 8th. Kim Kirchmeyer was appointed as director of DCA. She's been with the department since 1999 in her most recent role serving as the executive officer of the medical board. So we welcome her. And also DCA Communications Division created a new publication entitled DCA We Are Listening for the public to improve interactions with DCA during our board meetings. And so they created the poster as you can see up on the wall over there, and there's also a pamphlet, I just had it, that we've set out for the public to take as they walk in. So that's concludes the DC update.
Excellent. We'll move on to item E, review and possible action on the September 5th, 2019 LATC meeting minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved by Andy Bowden, seconded by John Rashensky. Discussion. Thoughts? Public comment? Roll call. Andy?
Mark Trescott,
Yes.
Andrew Bowden, yes. Susan Landry,
Yes.
Patricia Trouth,
Yes.
John Roshinsky.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. We'll move on to item F. Program Manager's Report, an update on LATC's administrative management, examination, licensing, and enforcement programs. Trish?
Oh, I wanted to start with an update from the last meeting where you just approved the minutes, just on the election results from the CLARB meeting. The committee nominated Kerry Bird for president-elect, and he won. The committee nominated Les Smith for the vice president position. However, Chuck Smith won that election. And then the remaining names that went forward by the committee, Allison Fleury, treasurer, Joel Carrara, Region 5 director, and committee on nominations member Chad Danos and Deb Peters did win the election. And then the 3 bylaws that we voted on were approved. Okay. We continue with our business modernization efforts. Stage 1 business analysis report was submitted to agency secretary, to the Department of Technology for approval. And then we continue with stage 2 activities, including we viewed approximately 10 vendor demonstration, software demonstrations, and working with 5 cohort DCA programs. And in November 18th, we'll discuss the vendors, including market research questionnaire results and consolidated business requirements and costs. It's in stage 3 where we'll begin identifying which vendor we'll be selecting. An update on the credit card payment renewal that was rolled out on April 23rd. We're averaging about 60 renewal payments each month, and since it's been rolled out through the end of September, we've processed 402 license renewals online. So that's really wonderful. Okay.
Can I make one comment on that? I did my license renewal online, and it was listed as, I forget what it was, $200 or $220, and I paid that, and then got a letter subsequent to that a month later saying, well, it's gone up, so you owe an additional $200. I would just like to see if there's a way that we can make it so that it's very clear on the online renewal what it is that the fee actually is. Because it's stated that it was $200 or $220, whatever it was, and I paid for that with the credit card, and then got the letter
Right,
later
it
on.
really wasn't a system error. It was an error on our part in not
Oh.
updating the fee change timely. So that's
Okay.
been since resolved.
Okay,
and
great.
Everyone's been notified. So
All
I
right.
apologize for that.
That's right.
Okay. As part of our strategic plan, we also are working on an online candidate tutorial, and so I will be meeting with DCA on the 18th to see the first draft of that presentation and hope to bring it to the committee at our next meeting. And then later on in our meeting today, we'll have a presentation on the occupational analysis. I'm on page 18 of the program manager's report at the top. Staff will attend UC Davis next Tuesday for 2 senior-level professional practice classes for some outreach efforts, and also update on the various education and training pathways. And then regarding the status of our regulations, just overview, they are all with DCA at this time, with the exception of 2655 and 2656 substantial relationship criteria for rehabilitation. Those are both in the 45-day comment period published by OAL on October 11th, and that comment period ends November 25th. And then attached, as we started including, is the enforcement report. And then if there aren't any questions, I'll have Stacy present the annual enforcement report. You have a question?
Are we on page 25? Okay. On page 25? Is that under annual or the?
The annual is the would be agenda
Okay.
item F2.
So on page 25, third paragraph, last two sentences, the proposed change, current advertising requirements. I thought it also was to be regarding all correspondence. Because right now it was the licensing number had to be on contracts. And then advertising just had our name, and then we talked about adding it to advertising, but I thought we did it on all correspondence, that you had to have your license number, like your email address.
Do you know if that detail is in the proposed changes? Do you know if that?
It's not, the proposed language that was approved, that was voted on, it just was to add the, I mean, we don't have it in here, but it was just to add and license number.
Clarification, so add license number just in general, not, because in here it says just for advertising.
So the way that it states currently is that a landscape architect shall include his or her name and the words landscape architect in all forms of advertisements or presentments made to the public in connection with the rendition of landscape architectural services. So I think renditions, presentments made to the public would consider email or correspondence, right?
Right, if you continue in that sentence, it says, including but not limited to any advertisement, card, letterhead, or contract proposal.
Right.
So-
It doesn't specifically say email, but.
I'm sorry, where is that one?
That's in 2671, the regulation, subsection A,
And say it again, please.
including but not limited to any advertisement, card, letterhead, or contract proposal.
Okay, so in this, in our packet here, it only says, will expand to include license numbers in the form of advertising. So does that need to be clarified in here, or is this okay with what it says?
That's
It's
up to
already-
you guys. I mean, we can make a note of that in the meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Oh, no, I'm fine. Okay, so are there any other questions?
Are we talking about,
I can't hear you, sorry.
are we talking about this, what item we on? Item F?
Yes.
Okay, so I do have a number of questions that I had regarding to the information that was in here regarding the exam.
Okay.
And if we go to page 17, it looks like between the California candidates and the national, that there's a significant difference between the two. And then also looking at the difference between the 2018 and the 2019, that it looks like the failure rate went up substantially, or, I mean, enough that in my mind, it leaves some questions about, well, one question that I brought up is, what specifically are the candidates failing at? And what I'm thinking is that later on in the meeting today, we're going to be talking about,
The occupational analysis.
yeah, the occupational analysis, if that is being looked at directly as part of that process, where those differences are. Is the occupational analysis, I know that's looking specifically at what are the typical duties and tasks that landscape architects do, but it's obvious looking at the exam results that the candidates are failing in certain areas, and I think what we should be looking at is, are we properly identifying the particular type of education and experience that candidates are expected to have when it's looking like there's definitely some weaknesses in those areas.
Definitely. I think some of your questions could be addressed during that time regarding it. And just want to remind us that because of our multiple pathways, sometimes that does maybe dilute or affect the pass rates a little. So
Okay.
did you want to wait to discuss it then? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And then the only other thing I had was on page 18, where we were looking at the reciprocity, and the specific item, I guess it's in the second paragraph on the page there, where we're talking about having 10 years of practice. I just had a question, how is that actually determined?
But that's actually updated. It's not 10 years.
Yeah, that was a previous proposal, and then the board decided to have the LATC better align reciprocity and initial licensure. And so we have a new proposal that's in progress right now. So that's just background history on kind of how we got to where we are.
Okay.
So can you remind us how many years it is?
Now it's not, that was a previous proposal where the committee was interested in allowing reciprocity candidates who had 10 years of experience, and we're no longer going that route. We're keeping it consistent for reciprocity and initial licensure.
Okay, and the only other thing I'd like to bring up on page 20, the section where we're talking about lab accreditation standards. I know that lab, I was in a meeting yesterday where this was discussed, that lab is currently accepting comments because they're in the process of reanalyzing their accreditation standards. And it sounds like there's a potential for some definite changes in those standards. And they're accepting comments through January 15th. And I know our next meeting won't be until sometime after that. And I guess the question that I have is, how is this board and LATSI going to be responding? Are we going to be submitting any type of comments on what their proposed standard changes to their standards are going to be?
Can we discuss that now, Tara?
No. Yeah, I would recommend that you guys have a specific agenda item so the public is aware that you're reviewing the LAAB standards and their proposed revisions for comment.
Okay, so I would assume at this point then, if any of us has any comments or whatever, we should just submit those, not as LATSI, but just as practitioners to the lab on that. Okay.
Tara, that's fine. Individual practitioners, we can submit our thoughts to LAAB.
Yeah, as long as you're not representing that
Right.
you're submitting your comments as an agent of the committee.
When are the comments due for?
January 15th, I was told, is the deadline for comments.
Okay, any other comments about item F1, Program Managers Report? If not, Stacy, why don't we have you address F2?
So at the end of fiscal year 18-19, the LATC had only 8 pending enforcement cases. And the average time to complete an internal investigation for that last fiscal year was 122 days, which is significantly less than the 270 days. That's our goal. We had 3 final citations last fiscal year, all but one we got paid for, which we did contract with a collection agency in conjunction with the Architects Board in April of 2019, and I submitted that unpaid citation along with one from fiscal year 2016-17, and we were successful in getting the unpaid citation from 2018-19 paid by that respondent, and then the collection agency is still working on the other one from 2016-17. So hopefully they get it for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thoughts or comments on this
Yep.
issue?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
If we submit a name, are we anonymous, or does the name have to be posted?
Anonymous.
Okay, because there are so many people in my area that are advertising either as a landscape architect or they're a landscape designer, but they're drawing drawings for clients. So I've gone out to, a lot of it's residential, and I've gone out to get work, and they're like, oh, well, I found this other person, they're half your price, and they're willing to bub the drawings. I'm like, well, they're not allowed to do that. So I've been very hesitant, though, to submit the people, because I could probably turn in 5 right now.
Yeah, you could always just send them to, either to Trish or to our general inbox and just submit them anonymously.
Me.
Just state, yeah,
Yeah,
you
okay.
would just state, I'm submitting this anonymously, and that's how we would just handle it.
Yeah, because I get the feeling that a lot of the people that are landscape designers feel like, well, whatever, nothing's going to happen to me by doing this.
Right, and, unless we know about it, they're going to continue to do it, so.
Okay. Guess I'll start turning them in.
Sure. Any other input on item F2? Okay. If not, I'll move on to item G. Laura, will you please present?
Are you opening these to public for item or not?
No, we don't have any action items.
Oh, it's only on action items? Okay, sorry.
Laura, will you please present the 2019 legislation?
Okay, so let's see, I think the first item we have is AB 476 by Assemblymember Rubio. This bill would have required the Department of Consumer Affairs to create a task force to study the licensing of foreign trained professionals and create a report to the legislature. The governor vetoed this bill, so it is dead. The next item is AB 1076 by Assemblymember Ting. The governor did sign this bill. This doesn't really directly impact LATC or the board, but will impact applicants in terms of the types of convictions that would be considered. And how they can get relief for convictions that we would consider in part of the licensure process.
And is that just for candidates that are, or would that be for any practitioners looking for reinstatement?
For new applicants. Okay, so the next item is Assembly Bill 626 by Assemblymember Quirk Silva. This is a 2-year bill, so it would, it can be taken up again in January when the legislature reconvenes. This is sponsored by 2 of the professional associations, engineers and architects, about conflict of interest provisions and when professionals can be involved in the, sort of in the bid process and then do the work. So it would create an exemption for certain services. There is quite a bit of opposition to the bill. And so I'm not sure how much information we put into the packet. But so the sponsors are trying to work with the opponents. A lot of the construction groups are opposed to the legislation. And then there have been some newspaper editorials opposed to it as well about creating exemptions to conflict of interest provisions, that it just generally doesn't look good. So the board has been interested in that bill since it directly impacts architects. But I'm not sure at this point whether the bill's going to move forward.
Question.
Mhm.
So if it's in italics, what does that mean?
In the bill text?
Yes.
That means that is new language in that version of the bill. The next item is Senate Bill 601 by Senator Morrell. The governor signed this bill. This allows boards, sorry, I skipped ahead. Give me 1 second. To authorizes boards to waive the license fee for someone displaced due to economic hardship due to a state of emergency. So boards could adopt regulations in order to implement this. And then the last bill is Senate Bill 608 by Senator Glazer. This was the sunset extension bill for the board and the LATC. So it extends the sunset dates for 4 years. Also makes some changes, I think, which we've previously discussed, including requiring fingerprinting of new applicants, as well as some changes to the written contract provisions.
I have a question, if I may. So this is fingerprinting of new applicants. What
Yes.
about existing licensees?
No, it only provides for fingerprinting for new applicants.
Okay, so existing licensees are exempt from this?
Yes, and so I would expect the legislature to consider that again in 4 years, whether they want to go ahead and add existing licensees.
Great, thank you very much.
That's all I have.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to go over these as a group, just kind of keep our finger on the pulse. So thank you so much, Laura, for pulling this together. Move on to item H, discuss and possible action on the LATC budget items. Presentation by DCA Budget Office regarding LATC annual update. Trish, would like to kick this off.
So I'd like to introduce and welcome Paul McDermott, budget analyst from Department of Consumer Affairs, and he'll provide an overview for our budget and fund condition.
Good morning. My name is Paul McDermott. I'm the DCA budget analyst for LATC. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today are going to be basically the budget, some of the issues we have within DCA that everybody's fully aware of, but we're working through it and working around it. And first of all, what I'd like to do is when I look at a budget, a program's budget, I look at what's coming in, like any business. The revenue streams coming in, the expenditures going out. And on the first page that you have, we'll work on 3 pages here. The first page, what I've done, it's this one here, is I just did a quick snapshot of the revenues and a quick snapshot of the expenditures. And behind in your packet, you'll have the expenditure page, and then you'll have what's called the fund condition page, and I'll explain those as we go along. Just to keep in mind, we have some issues with fiscal where we don't have hard numbers right now because we have yet closed out 2017-18 and 18-19. So numbers we're talking about today are going to be projected, but they're as accurate as we can get them out of the system. The allocation numbers are hard numbers that we presented to the governor's budget and has been approved, so those allocation numbers are solid numbers. Numbers that we have, just so you know, what we're talking about is the prelim 12 numbers from 18-19. So this will be at the end of the fiscal year. And the reason they're prelim is because we have not closed out the year. So I just want to make sure we understood that. And if you look at the estimated revenues, we have the allocation of $588,000 with the appropriations of $1,059,000. We're projecting the revenues to come in roughly at $558,704, and the expenditures to be $1,031,000. Every time we project or have an assumption, we assume that you're going to spend to your total allocation. In this case, we're not spending, we're projecting you to be below it. which is great. However, our projections that we have and the money that we're bringing in the revenues still are affected by the fee, the major fee being at the $220 fee, which will now be moved back up to the $400 fee. So what you see here is what we have at the end of the year. And if you look at the budget, it does look like we're structurally imbalanced, but that's fine where we are now, because we understand we're still dealing with the $220 fee. We're still dealing with some issues. That should correct itself as we move forward. And once I have more definitive numbers, I will present that to Ms. Rodriguez, and we'll be able to finalize hard facts for you. And at that time, I will present, hopefully at the next board meeting, I'll have numbers that we can present to you. So with that said, I'm not too concerned about where we stand on the budget. We're monitoring it. We understand that there are some issues. But as long as we're close to what we're spending, we're underspending our allocation, we're very happy. We know the revenues are going to increase. We're very happy with that. So we expect the revenues to go up, and we expect the expenditures to either stabilize or go down. And as I was talking to Ms. Rodriguez, several things that were on the issue of what has increased in expenditures. It's going to be salaries and wages, a facilities correction on rent charges, and some AG costs. Other than that, everything is tracking like they've tracked for the last 4 or 5 years. And the most important thing is the cost of doing business has gone up across the state, across DCA. So that's pretty much the budget in a nutshell. We're okay with where we are now. We're going to monitor what we need to do, and if there's any questions, I'm glad to field them.
Can I?
I guess one question I would have is given the difference between the revenues and expenditures at this point, the difference is being made up by our reserves. Is that how it's working, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way the budgets are always started, they start from the previous year. And so if you look back previous years, we've had a pretty good surplus, and it carries over from year to year. And at that point, when we reduced to the renewal fee, we had a major surplus and a major issue that we had to come down underneath 24-month limitation. We've come down on that, and we've, like you said, we've eaten away at the previous balance. So even though you do have revenues coming in, you still have carryover from years before. And now that's starting to equalize its way out. So we need to now monitor a little bit more with the way it should be handled. So yes.
Oh, I just wanted to note on the fund condition document, this was a handout that is separate from what's included in the packet, and it's just with updated information that we'll be sure to upload to our website. But I wanted to note that it's different from what's in the packet.
Okay.
And thank you for noting. The reason we have an updated numbers is because we got quarterly updated numbers for the revenues. I don't have them yet for the expenditures. So I gave you as updated as I could with the revenues.
Question? Up in red on the printed handout, it says 10-7, but in the book it says 10-14. So it seems like this handout was prepared before the booklet.
That would have been a typo. That's my monitoring there.
So it's as of today?
Yeah.
Okay, I just was curious. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. McDermott?
Before we move on to the next
Okay,
one
please.
under budgets,
I can't hear you guys, sorry. Can you move your mic closer?
before we move on to the next part under H, I was going to ask Mr. McDermott if he could stay for this part of the agenda
Okay.
item.
Sure, if you're comfortable. Okay, let's move on then to Part 2, which is review and possible action on potential initial landscape license fee decrease.
So in February, a member of the public inquired whether the board could consider initial license fee reduction as we discussed the renewal license fee going back from $220 to $400. And so in May, staff presented an analysis of the initial license fee compared with other comparable jurisdictions. And at that time, the committee felt that additional information from the budget office and was required in order to determine whether a reduction would be feasible. And so, with our budget update now, it would be a good opportunity to ask any questions and decide whether we'd like to proceed with the initial license fee reduction.
Comments? Andy?
Well, based on the information that's been presented, I don't see how that we could really afford to reduce the license fees. I mean, I know that it would be, no one likes having to pay fees, obviously, and we'd like to try and make them as manageable as possible, but I think if somebody, I think I mentioned this at the time when we first discussed this, I think if somebody has gone to the expense of taking the LARE and the CSE, which I know is expensive to do, but they've passed those, and the only thing they have left to do is to pay their license, their initial license fee, I think they would pay that relatively gladly to say, okay, fine, here's, take my money, because I want that license number. So I personally, I don't see it as being that necessary at this particular moment in time.
Excuse me, Courtney or Stacy, how many candidates do we license every year?
100?
About 100. So we're talking about 100 people. And the concept was cutting it around in half, around $200 plus or minus. Mr. McDermott, do you have any thoughts about that as you look at our budget? And
Sure. I've run several scenarios on this, and right now, I don't think we need to cut the budget. I think we need to keep it at the $400 level, and we're getting through what we need to get through. I think it would be a sound decision to keep the fee at $400.
Okay. Other thoughts by committee members?
My only question would be what percentage of the licensing fees that we take in every year are for new licensees? Is it a relatively small number compared to the total number of licensees that are renewing every year, or do we know that?
I think we're only talking about initial license fee,
Right.
so not renewal license fee,
Right, but that's still a percentage of, I mean.
the overall total.
Right, every year.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had a question. How long did we drop it? So when?
4 years,
4 years?
two renewal cycles.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we had the reduced fee for approximately 4 years, and we're moving it back up again. And is there,
Right.
I'm sorry, any public comment on this issue? Any? No? Okay. Further discussion by the committee members?
So I was just going to note, if I may,
Yeah, please.
that the fee reduction and negative BCP was due to our fund balance approaching the statutory limit. So in referring to the handout, it looks like we're at a level that is recommended by DCA. So I don't know if a fee reduction would benefit in contributing to, the direction that we're going with our fund balance.
And what is the statutory limit right now?
Is it 24?
24 months.
24.
Yeah.
24 months? Okay.
And we think at DCA, we like a very healthy would be 3 to 6. The 24 was, we were approaching that pretty rapidly. We had to spend down that fund.
If I could ask one more question, I think we might have actually discussed this once before. Out of that $400 initial license fee, what are the expenses that the LATC incurs that's driving that $400? In other words, I know there's the wall certificate, there's the pocket license, there's certain costs that the LATC has that has to be accounted for in that $400. Is the balance of that then administrative because it takes time to create the license and?
I'm not sure if I can answer the details, the specifics of the breakdown. All I do know is that that fee has been in place, I think, since 2001. It's been a very long time, and I think an analysis was probably done at that time to determine what the fee would be, but I don't know what that process is.
Yeah, typically what'll happen is you'll go through a fee audit, and the fee audit will determine what occupational task or whatever task it takes to process that license. And we went back and we saw that it was discussed in a 2001 meeting. However, we don't have the information from that meeting. So typically a fee audit will tell you what the fee should be. And I think it takes about a quarter of the year to complete that. So it's been quite some time since one has been done.
So, question, so you'll do an audit before you increase it, or?
Yeah, there'll be an audit incurred
Okay.
to go over the amount that you already are statutorily allowed to charge. There will be a fee audit and a regulation involved.
It seems like a large amount. I mean, I understand it was 400, but you're almost doubling it. So, I mean, does the audit actually then determine the amount that it'll increase, or how does that work?
So just so you know, the increase, you're talking about the increase that just incurred, you're thinking the 220 to the 400. That was for the renewal, and we're talking about the initial audit, the initial fee now of $400. So the renewal is automatically through budget bill lane or through regulation moved back up to the 400. The initial has always stayed at 400. So to go through that whole process, we would go through a fee audit, the board, the committee would go through a fee audit to determine if it's 450, if it's 500, whatever it is at that time. So it is a pretty good study, and it's not just a number that we say, hey, we think we need $450 or $500. So it is a process that must be gone through.
Okay, so I have a question. Since the last time we've done this was 2001,
Correct.
does DCA have any guidelines in terms of when it's most appropriate to look at these?
It's up to the board.
Okay,
The committee
okay.
members and the board.
Okay, so that's the question to us. Do we feel like it's appropriate right now maybe to look at this item in a more studied manner?
I have a question before we have it. If I look at your new handout, I think you just said we should have how many months in reserve?
From 3 to 6 is pretty healthy.
Okay, so if I look at fund balance, reserve for economic uncertainties, and months, and we have 11 months in reserve,
Right now.
right? But you're saying we should have,
No, you're fine. So it's always the worst case scenario. We're okay with 3 to 7. At one time, we were approaching 24. And so we were trying to spend down. So we're still in the process of spending down. So if you see it, we're trending negative. So as we move forward, if you stay at 11, you stay at 11. That's fine. Some boards can only handle 3 to 6 months. Some are at 12.
okay. So if we were to reduce at 100 annual new, that's right, you said 100 a year or new, what percentage would that go down to? Because that's $20,000.
I'd have to take into account what the expenditures are, because the expenses have gone up. So if we reduce the revenues coming in, but our expenditures are going up, that was the balance we had to do. So that's why I recommend right now not reducing the fee, because expenses have drastically gone up statewide.
So looking at 2021, it says we'll have 8.3, and then the following 5.4. So I guess my question is, how much would that 8.3 go down at 20,000, because we're up in the millions?
I'd have to look at that again and get back to you on how much
Okay.
it would.
Okay.
Okay,
Turn it off.
so the desire of the committee at this point, it is currently at $400,
Correct.
and it will stay there at 400 unless we act. What are the thoughts right now?
I think compared to a lot of other licenses, I think that's pretty reasonable. You know? I mean, it's an investment as a practitioner. It's part of your operating expenses. And I think as long as that reserve doesn't continue to trend down into a negative number, then at that point, we would have to take a look at it. But it sounds like right now that we're in pretty good shape, and we don't see anything coming up unless all of a sudden we have a huge number of people that decide just not to renew. But then I guess that's more work for the rest that are still around, so.
Okay, other thoughts?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, no, go ahead,
Sorry.
please.
Based on the fact that of how few citations and complaints we're getting, I'd be curious to know how many people like get a degree or take the test that end up don't actually pay the fee. Like, is a lot of people just saying the 400 will be enough that I don't actually get my license? Because again, it goes back to, how many people are actually being cited for not having a license.
Okay, and I think that speaks, Andy, to your comments.
Well, a little bit. I think mine was more of of an observation that I don't think that if somebody has gone to the expense of going to school, taking the LAIR exam, taking the CSE, that they're going to be stopped from getting a license because of $400 after having spent multiple years, multiple thousands of dollars in other fees. So I don't see that the initial license fee is necessarily a barrier to gaining the final license. That was the point I was trying to make.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, I do want to comment that I think it was in the spirit of making it easier for new candidates to become licensed. But I believe that before we do it, we should go through the process of analyzing what is the true cost right now, especially since it's been 18 years since we did it last time. My only fear is that the report comes back and the true cost is $500 to $600 or something more, which I think would be counterproductive, and then we might be compelled to then, adjust it. So at this point, I'm very comfortable, given the numbers that were presented, the trending, where we're going, where we're anticipating our budget to be, just kind of letting it be the way it is right now. But I do think that in the future, this body should consider looking at the true cost of this at some time. I just hesitate to do it right now. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the only other thought that I would have would be if it looks like at some point the state is going to require more money from the boards or whatever, that we get enough lead time knowing that we can kind of anticipate that's going to happen. And maybe at that point is when we would want to take a harder look at all of this.
Good. Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item. Item I, occupational analysis of landscape architect profession. Trish, item number 1.
Okay. So the 2019-2021 strategic plan contains an objective to conduct an occupational analysis to update our current, the California supplemental exam. So I'd like to welcome Tavi Pop, Research Manager, and Heidi Linser, Chief of OPES, to walk us through the occupational analysis process. Okay. Thank you. Oh, would we like to move? Okay.
I can see it over there, though.
Yeah, you can see it over there.
Thank you. Good morning. I am here. If I'm too loud, I tend to project my voice a lot, so if I'm too loud, please let me know. I'm here with the chief for the Office of Professional Examination Services, Heidi Linser, and she'll help me to answer any questions you have. Please stop me at any time during the presentation if you have any questions. We were asked by Trace Rodriguez to give you an overview of the upcoming work that our office will be doing for the landscape architect exam. I do not work specifically with this exam. I am a manager, and one of my test specialists work with this exam, so I am not as intimate with the exam as he is. I am, though, the managers at OPS have their own projects, and I am the test specialist for the architect's exam. So just to get started, if you are not familiar, OPS provides consulting services. We really work like a private consulting firm, providing examination services to boards and bureaus within the Department of Consumer Affairs and committees. We also, anytime, we often get asked for recommendations that relate to technical standards for examination development for, organizations within DCA as well. The guidelines and law that we use that guide our work is the Business and Professions Code, Section 139, the Principles for Validation and Use of Personnel Selection Procedures, and we are constantly referring to the standards for education and psychological testing as well, almost on a daily basis. So when we develop exams in our office, this is what guide our work. We need to provide a reliable method for identifying practitioners who are able to perform the profession safely and competently. That's what the examinations that we develop hopefully do, is discriminate between candidates who are ready to practice from the ones who are not ready to practice independently. We focus on entry-level tasks and that are important to protect the public, and at every step of the way, everything we do is guided by the professional recommendations of subject matter experts who are recruited by the different committees, boards, and bureaus that we work with. So, when Trish Rodriguez presents to you, a contract that we'll hopefully sign again with them for the development of an occupational analysis, this is a recommendation, it's a requirement by Section 139 of the Professional and Business Codes. And why do we need to do that? So the question is, if somebody takes the layer, a professional takes the layer, and are they ready to practice in California? And with the recent very unfortunate fires that happened in our state, we have a lot of defensive space that we need to consider. We need to, when a landscape architect is designing for, say, a resident that's on a slope, what they will do, the plants, the spacing that they will recommend is very different than a residence that does not have the conditions that California has as far as fire. Residents in California also more and more demand plants that are drought tolerant, and we have a responsibility as well to conserve water in our state. I wanted to share this with you. I love plants and I love parks, and I was visiting my son in Georgia, and I was there for a week and a half, and in that week and a half, we had 3 major storms, like a storm that I have never seen here. I live in Fair Oaks. I had never seen here so much water coming down from the sky. And this is the picture on the left, is in a park that has no irrigation system whatsoever. And then when this is in July, and I came back home, so this is Georgia. And when I came back home, this was the park near my house, and that's the same time of the year. This was late July this year, and both parks have no irrigation whatsoever. But look at the difference in the grass, So a landscape architect who does a wonderful job with landscaping in Georgia might not do as well in California because we have such unique conditions here. We have that beautiful golden grass, but how do we, I'm saying all that, but how do we objectively define what should be in the examination for landscapers, who will work in California. So this is the cycle of examination development that we use at OPES. We start with an occupational analysis. Our cycle does not include an evaluation of national exams for all the programs we work with, because not all of them have a national exam. Once we develop an occupational analysis, we look at what the national exams are testing, and then from there we put together, and I'll go into this in more detail, an examination outline, what exactly an exam in California should be testing. We go through a series of item writing and item reviews, workshops, and we construct a test form, and then we decide how many questions a candidate should answer correctly in order to receive their license. But please note that I'm saying we, but when I say we, I mean everything is done with the help of subject matter experts. None of the decisions that we make are done arbitrarily, sitting in our desks, working alone. And this emphasizes that our clients do a great job. We often ask them to ensure that we have new practitioners in all the phases of the work we do. So we request our boards and bureaus and committee to recruit people who represent different areas of California, different specialties within the practice, and it is those people who help us, to go through that cycle of examination development. So, what is the purpose of an occupational analysis? I think somebody was mentioning it already. I think you have a pretty good idea, but I hope this is a refresher for you. So, it provides a description of current practice. So, Section 139 requires that that happens every 5 to 7 years, and there is a reason for that. We used to emphasize technology. There's a lot of technology changes with a lot of the professions we work with, but in the last I don't know how many decades, the world weather's changing and things. I'm sure that for the work of the landscape architect, that needs to be reflected in the examination as well with climate change and all that. So it provides a basis for job-related, because that's what the subject matter experts help us with, is to make sure the exams are job-related, fair, and that whole process makes us feel comfortable in knowing that we can legally defend what we're doing. It also establishes a validity by linking the examination with the results that we get from the occupational analysis, meaning we're really testing what we're supposed to be testing, and provide is also a basis for legislation and new policies. So how does that process work? The process works with a test specialist at OPES starting to do some background checking, looking at history, and then getting a list of currently licensed architects that we can interview. We do our interviews all over the phone, and we ask for a number of people that we can interview, but we don't stop the interviews until we feel like we have a good grasp on what the job is of the landscape architects. Once we collect all that information, we organize that information into tasks that folks do in their jobs and knowledge that's necessary to accomplish those tasks. Once those tasks and knowledge statements are done, we put it in a survey, and that survey goes out to either all of the licensed practitioners or a representative sample. When we give them time to respond, and when a survey comes back, we perform a statistical analysis of the results. We present those results to a group of subject matter experts, and they, at that meeting, determine what's critical to be in the California examination. But in California, for landscape architects, there is a national exam, and we don't want for the examination, we don't want to submit the candidates to questions and content that they have already been tested on, in this case, on the layer. So The layer and the California and the CSE should complement each other, and then by complementing each other, we are testing for the full practice. So how do we review the national examinations? It starts with a psychometric evaluation of how they came to their examination outline, and the next slide goes into more detail about that. The SMEs compare what the national exam covers to what we found out by on our survey for the occupational analysis, and then they identify the critical level content that's not assessed in the national exam to make sure we cover that in our exam, and then we have a final outline for the California exam. So what do we do during the psychometric evaluation? We do a lot. We evaluate how they went about doing their occupational analysis, how many people they surveyed, how they created their task and knowledge statements. Were practitioners from California involved in that process? We review their procedures for establishing the passing score. How many SMEs do you use? What process did you use to come up with a passing score for that exam? We review their security procedures for sure, and administration procedures, all the procedures to develop the examinations, how often they do their workshops, who review these items. Is it always the same people who write and review the questions? We review the passing score and the passing rate, and the information that's available to candidates to prepare for the examination also. So that's all part of the psychometric evaluation to make sure that they meet industry standards for examination development. So like I said before, in that puzzle in the middle, you have the three pieces on the left would be maybe the national exam, and then we come in with the next piece from California. What's unique about California to make sure that we're testing the candidates on everything they need to be tested? Usually the national exams are very mainstream practice because they need to cater to as many states as possible. Where in California, of course, like every other state, California has its uniqueness as far as weather, climate, geology, and different laws and etc. So depending on what we find out with the help from SMEs, we'll find out on the first Venn diagram that you see that the OPS will recommend that the candidates take, if there's like a huge overlap, say for example, that everything that relates to the practice of landscape architects was being covered in the national exam, that the only thing that was not being covered, of course, would be California law. Then OPS would recommend, yes, that these candidates can, for practice, take the layer, and then we're going to develop our little law and ethics, possibly exam, only relating to California law. But when we do that evaluation, and we find out that the national exam is covering some of the basics of the practice, but not everything, because California has so many unique situations that are not law-related, but they're practice-related. Then OPS will recommend that the candidates take the national exam, but that we complement it with our own exam containing some practice content areas and also the California law. But if we find out that the national exam was poorly developed, it only used 4 different SMEs for the whole process, it's not valid, it has issues, not covering what people need to know in California, then we would say, okay, let's forget the national exam. We're going to develop our own full exam. Candidates don't have to take the national exam. So those would be like the 3 options. So I tried putting together in this slide for you to understand how the occupational analysis, how is it so fundamental to update the examination. So I picked an example of water conservation, but we could easily pick any other topic here. It could be related to fire-tolerant plants, okay? It could be related to fires because that's so fresh in our minds now. But say during the interview, during that process, I told you I'm not that intimate with the content of the landscape architect, so don't take this too seriously. It's just to illustrate how the changes would happen. So say the exam right now is not too strong in water conservation. Just imagine that. So during the interviews, the test specialist starts interviewing people, and he or she start hearing water conservation. Yes, when we do water conservation, and the test specialist taking notes about that. And then the test specialist starts asking these people being interviewed, how do you, if a person doesn't mention it, go, how does water conservation affect your work? And then the person explains all that. Meanwhile, the test specialist is writing all these tasks and then asks the interviewee, okay, what kind of laws, what kind of practices you need to know in order to perform these tasks that are related to water conservation. So the test specialist writes tasks and that also writes this knowledge that the practitioners need to know. So when it's time to put together the survey, now the test specialist wants to know, is it just the people who I interviewed who are really working around water conservation, or is this something that's happening throughout the state? So that's included in the survey, all those tasks and all that knowledge in relation to water conservation. So when the survey comes back with all the ratings, OPS analyzes the results statistically and then presents the results to subject matter experts who look at all these tasks, how they're rated, all this knowledge, how they're rated, they link one to another, and they decide what would be critical for landscape architects at entry level to know in order to perform their jobs, competently and safely. So we have that, and then when we do the review of the national exam, they look at the final content, what the layer says is the content of that examination, what we found out is important to be in our examination, and say when they compare and they go, the layer is not testing candidates enough on water conservation issue, our outline needs to contain for the examination, needs to have an added subscale or so many questions, so the new outline would then add that content, on water conservation. So that's how the process would work. And finally, this is like a very high-level outline of what's going on with the landscape architect's exam. In 2014, there was an occupational analysis and a study of the national exam done. So it is time to start a new occupational analysis and also evaluate the results of the occupational analysis against the national exam and see if the exam needs updating and if it needs changes. So the test specialist is already starting to do a little bit of background work and history research on landscaping, and we are, according to our new AIC that I think you're going to be looking at, the OA and the survey would be done towards the end of 2020. And this is my presentation. Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah, I just, looking at the slide that you were just looking at, it looks like there's roughly about a 2-year lag from the national occupational analysis and then California looking at doing their own. Is that typical?
Well, it's, I wouldn't say it's typical. Sometimes, like with the architects, for example, we have been delaying doing our occupational analysis because we're waiting anxiously for NCARB to release, because I think they're engaged in occupational analysis right now, so we play around that. But at that time, when they released it, it was a bit too early to do the, the new occupational analysis for California. so it just happens to be now. I actually I was not involved in any conversations before on deciding the timing of the occupational analysis. We talked earlier this year and decided that it would be best to get started now. And I think it's going to be okay. It's not, if it was like a 4-year difference, I would say that's a problem, but with 2 years now.
Okay, additional questions?
And I don't know if the question is directed at you or back to our board. Is any of the questions asked about drawing drawings and proficiency or lack of proficiency in actually drawing the drawings?
I think, I'm gonna, this is just a complete guess, but I think this would be something that is so basic to the profession that it would have been covered by layer. But I don't know that for sure. So I'm not familiar with the last, evaluation of the national exam.
Okay, Andy?
Well, I think that really what we would want to make sure is the California-specific items, not necessarily items that are more general to landscape architecture that you might get in school that would be tested for by the LAIR. So like MWELO would be something that we'd want to make sure is on the exam, because since the last occupational analysis was done, MWELO was just kind of coming on. So I'm guessing that the California supplemental exam probably doesn't test as much for MWELO as we might want it to. But we would need the subject matter experts now to kind of weigh in on that. I don't know what the CSE currently is, what the topics are that are covered under CSE at the moment. But that would be one of the things that I would think would be greatly imperative. And you had brought up too, fire safety and fuel modification and fuel management, things like that. Those are things that obviously are more California specific than they would be to Georgia. When we were at the CLARB meeting in St. Louis last month or a couple months ago, whenever it was, I was sitting next to an individual who was saying about all the stormwater management stuff that their firm does. And they say they do it rather than the civil engineers do it. In fact, they don't even trust the civil engineers to do it, which was surprising. But again, that is a major component of their practice because of the environment that they live in. It rains so much more there that is just as important to them as fuel management might be to us. So it's those kind of things. It's going to be very regional and kind of more on a state-by-state kind of a thing. So I think that we just need to make sure that the occupational analysis is taking that into consideration of the California-specific items that isn't tested for on the LAIR or isn't covered as well on the LAIR that we might need more testing for to make sure that somebody could practice in California safely.
Additional questions? Any public questions? Thank you so very much for your presentation.
Can I make a final comment?
Sure, please do.
I just wanted to address something you mentioned earlier. We could, come back at a later time. We did do a presentation for the architects on issues related to passing score and passing rate. So we could arrange for a later date to discuss that topic also, okay?
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
I have a comment.
Push it.
So, with regard to minimal competency, how does that work?
When SMEs come for the passing score workshop, they create a document with sample performance behaviors for 3 different groups. And we do 3 different groups to help them to be in sync and anchored on the concept of minimal competency. So we developed this, document for like a highly effective entry-level practitioner, minimally competent, and incompetent. And we take tasks from the outline and that describes what the practitioner does, and then we discuss how would a highly effective entry-level practitioner handle this task? And how would a minimally competent handle this task? And how would an inefficient, candidate handle this task? So this is kind of like setting the standard for what they expect a minimally competent person would behave in the job. So we go through the outline and we end up with like a long set of behaviors that these people have in the work. And sometimes during the workshop, they'll go, oh my, I know somebody just like that. Whether it's highly efficient or minimally competent. So we start with that. But when we write questions, we keep reminding the item writers and then doing item review as well, saying, are we testing knowledge that's for entry level? And a lot of times they go, no, this is like too obscure. This is knowledge somebody would acquire after 10 years in practice. And then, so then we kill that question. Or during item review, we do the same thing. So at all steps of the way, we keep the SMEs with, using that in mind, that the exam is designed for minimal competency. And that's why we ask our clients to always recruit people who have been recently licensed because they have that idea fresher in their minds. Mm-hmm. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to item number 2 of Trish.
So attached is the interagency agreement related to the occupational analysis in effect for this fiscal year in the amount of $61,240, just to tie it back to our budget discussion earlier. And we are asking for the committee's approval so that the OPES can proceed with our occupational analysis.
Okay, committee questions, comments, thoughts?
So when I go back and I look at the percent passing, things like project planning and design, some of these are down as low as 35%, 43%. Seems like one of the lower categories. And then documentation somewhere around 50, passed some at 43. And it goes to my last question is, we used to have a whole section on drafting, designing, drawing, and that's what makes us different than a landscape designer. And I know, we're into the multiple choice, you can feed it into a computer, it makes it easier to score, but for a period of time, they did have a computerized drawing, and it just seems like if that's what makes us different from this landscape design category, why are we not having people actually draw a drawing? Because as someone who plan checks and reviews for when they submit to cities, there's like terrible, they don't even know how to put pressure loss on a valve or, make sure the right number of heads are connected. And so it just seems like I don't know if I keep bringing this up, but it just kind of cracks me up that the one thing that makes us different, we're not even testing on, and then somebody who's at a lower level goes to work and first thing they start to do is draw drawings. So I'm sure some of this has to do with how these are being able to grade, but there was at one time, when we took it, it was hand drafting, but I know at one time there was a computer drafting and they had, you could practice before you came. So I don't know if that falls into this, but I just keep looking at people's drawings and think, wow, it looks like you never drew something before.
So I think you're referring to the sections of the layer. So I don't remember exactly how many years ago that was, but they did restructure the layer and combine certain sections. And I think maybe at that time and over the recent years, they did become more, I'll say, user-friendly, and things are, on that electronic platform. I don't know what the reason is, if it's for ease of grading or if that's how the practice is. But this wouldn't be something that we would really have. This is CLARB that made the change to the sections. These are their sections.
Right, but irrigation is a big thing that makes us state different. That's just one example. And, their later discussion has to do with stormwater pollution prevention, which are drawings, showing your area. So I'd be interested, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but hear what other board members think.
Well, I'd like to just state that this process gives us the opportunity to bring these issues to the forefront, and the sample group involved in the process, voicing concerns or needs, will elevate it, in my opinion, so that it will start to show up on our state exams if it is something that's across the board identified as very, very important to practice landscape architecture. I'm looking at our friends from OPS.
Yeah, and it's not only if it's covered or not, is it covered?
I'm sorry,
or not?
excuse me, we need to get you on the mic, please. Sorry.
Like I'll mention an example that happened with the architects. I understood from my predecessor that when they did they looked and compared at the outline for the NCARB exam and the CSE for architects, that some of the areas were covered, but not covered in depth or enough. So then they decided that the architect's exam should contain more of that. So there's a little of duplication. So the SMEs look at that. The subject matter experts, at all that's critical to be a landscape architect in California, and they look at if it's covered in the national exam. And
So in a nutshell, this is our opportunity as a profession to tune up some of these issues that are very important to practice in
yeah,
California.
and it would be good for OPS to come back and present, once we have the results of the OA for California and what the SMEs identified as being critical after comparing to the national exam. We could provide a detailed, explanation of what happened and what was covered.
I think that'd be excellent, and I think that's the time that this body can really start to weigh in on some of these things that you're
So do
you're
we
concerned about.
recommend it today, or because we're having this conversation, or do we wait till they come back?
I think it's when they have an approved contract, they get into their work, they uncover information, they're prepared to bring us a presentation on these issues, is the proper time to talk about this.
And I-
Does anybody else have comments?
Yes, I do have a comment. I think, if I understand correctly, what we're looking at, though, is the contract. So once the contract is approved, then they can do their work, and part of it then would be interviewing subject matter experts. It sounds like you should probably be one of the subject matter experts that should be interviewed. So, but first, before they can get to that point, before we can really have the discussion of what needs to be on the test, we need to approve a contract for them to move forward. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is the item that
Okay,
we're
that is the item
discussing.
that we're looking at. So the question I have is, well, first off, I have one comment. I've been on the committee for probably 12 years. I've sat through several different presentations for this, and I have to compliment you. This was the best presentation out of the many that I've seen, so thank you very much for that. You explained it very well, and it was very thorough. And with that, I guess I would just like to ask one question as regards to the dollars that are designated for this, $61,000. How does this relate to the contract that we had approved previously? Do we know that? Do we have the past contract?
The past occupational analysis contract?
Yes, because that's what we're being asked to approve now, so
You want to know what the last,
I just want to know what the
Amount was
difference is. I know obviously there's been inflation and, costs have gone up, but does
I don't know.
does this compare to the last one? I guess is really what I'm trying to find out. We don't.
I
Oh,
don't know.
hold on.
I have one more question. When did we do this last?
Oh, it's-
Was that,
We did last in 2014, and OPS rates are about, so you know, about half the cost of what an outside consultant would cost to do these projects. but we did have a rate increase in the last, I think it was 2016, where we charge hourly rates, as I think you can see in the IAC, for just the cost of our services, of what it costs for, because we're state workers, so what it costs for the cost of state workers. And, but we did have a rate increase, so it's probably more than you paid last time. But it just basically covers our costs.
Sure. And I guess really what I'm just trying to find out is that the scope of services that we're being asked to approve and the cost for those services, and all I was trying to get an idea is the scope of services versus the scope that are presented today versus the scope of services that had been provided in the past. Are they the same? Are they similar? And-
Yes, the scope of services would be the same. The cost has gone up a little bit due to the
Right,
cost of.
and that's understandable.
Right.
So with that, Mr. Chair, are you entertaining a motion?
I believe I am. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the contract for the occupational analysis as presented.
And I'll
Second.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the contract as presented. Further comments, discussion, thoughts by the committee?
The only question that I have, and I had actually talked with Trish earlier about this, is the timeline. Based on what's in here, it looks like we're about where it says we should be, but I understand that these things tend to creep sometimes. So I guess my question is, when could we realistically expect to kind of get the results of this back? Will it be pretty much right on what's proposed right now, or? Yeah.
Okay, so we have a comment. We have an official comment. That's okay.
We worked very hard to stick with the timeline that we have given to you. For the occupational analysis, that's pretty much in our control, and as long as the board provides us with the subject matter experts that we need for the workshops, then those will go forward as on schedule. I don't know, you don't have the contract now to review the national? We don't have.
The linkage study.
Okay, so that one sometimes can be delayed because of issues with getting all the information that we want from the national for us to review. So sometimes that one can be delayed. But the occupational analysis is totally within our control, and we are on schedule the majority of the time. Maybe, the report may be a month or so later due to editors. Sometimes we have backups with our editors to review final reports, but the work should proceed on schedule.
Okay. On that matter, just really quickly, I'm sorry, John, Trish and Laura, how's it been in terms of getting subject matter experts? Has it been fairly easy to draw from the profession?
I think Courtney does the scheduling for it if she wants to
Yeah,
comment.
the past few workshops, we haven't had any problem. We
Good.
sent out a recruitment email to all the email addresses we have for licensees, and then we've been getting a good rate of return response.
Perfect. I think that's going to help. Do you have anything else?
I was just gonna ask, did I understand correctly that there will be an exam of the national occupational analysis, and that's part of this contract, or that's something entirely separate?
That's a separate contract. After this one is completed, that will be a separate IAC. So you'll get the costs for that and a separate timeline for that. But ideally, we would start as soon as this project is done. We move right into that so we don't lose any time as you're concerned about the timeline difference between the national and our occupational analysis.
Thank you. Trish?
Oh, no, I was just looking at the timeline, so then it looks like this would end around May, June, so we could present the committee with an IAC for the linkage study around our May meeting. I think we
Yes.
could talk about dates later, but,
Perfect.
okay.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Any public comments on this topic? No. Okay, any further, committee? Okay, let's go to roll call, please.
Mark Truscott.
Yes.
Andy Bowden, aye. Susan Landry.
Aye.
Patricia Trouth.
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, contract approved. And just really quickly, Laura, does that go, I'm sorry, Trish, does that go to that goes to the board then, or is
The
it?
IAC does not need to go to the board.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next item. Item J, discuss and possible action on LATC member administrative manual. Trish, I'm kicking it to you again.
Okay, so attached in this item is a draft LATC member administrative manual. In 2018, the board and LATC updated their manuals respective to the Sunset Review Report that was submitted in December of 2018. In June, the board approved additional amendments which are provided in tracking, both in underline and strikeout in the attachment. So we are asking the LATC for their review and approval for the attached draft.
Okay. I'm sorry, I think I'm going to call just a brief recess, if that's okay, then we'll start this up again.
Yep.
10-minute recess?
Effective member administrative manuals for the Sunset Review Reports. We updated all of our attachments, which was submitted to the legislature in December, and then in June, the board approved additional amendments to the manual. So attached is a copy of the LATC's manual. We mirrored what the board edited in their recent updates, and so what you'll see are the track changes, both in underline and strikeout, since the June board meeting, and we're asking for the LATC to review and approve the attached manual.
Okay, committee member comments, thoughts?
Tara has
I'm so
comments.
sorry, Ms. Tara.
On page 2, well, let's start with page 1. In the overview, in the second paragraph, it talks about the board and how the board members may serve up to a 2 4-year term. I think that the committee should also add their term limits so that it's clear. And according to Business and Professions Code Section 5621, subdivision C and D, the term limit is, it's a 4-year term expiring on June 1 of the 4th year, and no person shall serve as a member for more than 2 consecutive terms. I think that language should be added on page 2, presumably to the end of the first paragraph on that page.
Okay, thank you very much.
Question?
Please go ahead, Susan.
If it's 2 consecutive, how long do they need to be out till they can come back?
I believe as long as, I mean, what makes sense is someone else is appointed, whether or not they serve their entire 4-year term, question mark, but then the individual who was previously a member could reapply, as long as there's a break in the service and the term is appointed to someone else for a period of time. That's unclear.
Of how many months between? Because some cities or whatever agencies say you have to be out for at least 18 months, or so that it's not the person's term is 3 months after, and then he goes away and the previous person comes in.
Well, I
So
would
there's no gap that you have to have.
No, there's no specific gap, but I could tell you that the appointments seem to take quite a while because we're relying on the Assembly or the Senate or the Governor's office to make the appointments, so the turnaround is not going to be that quick.
Okay.
Okay, other questions?
That 4-year period, is that inclusive of the 1-year grace period, or that would be in addition?
Right, so the grace period is after the term has expired, and it's up to the appointing body to appoint the individual. So the grace period is typically after, I would say it's typically after a full 2 consecutive terms, but if there's no appointment that has been made, that's the critical piece here. As soon as there's an appointment, the grace period ends and the individual who's been selected begins their term.
Okay, one other quick question that I have on this is the second term, does the person just automatically roll into that, or do they have to be reappointed for the second term?
They have to be reappointed. Right, so they could serve out the grace period of 1 year, but then they would no longer be a member unless they got reappointed.
They would have to reapply?
Yes, typically the appointing authority wants you to go through the process to reapply, yes.
My 1 month count is-
I have a question.
That's all I had.
Okay,
On
please.
the 2 consecutive terms, Tara, are those 2 full terms, or if it's a partial, would,
So previously, I did some research and found an Attorney General opinion discussing whether or not service in a partial term constituted a term, and it does not. So according to the Attorney General's office, which we follow, serving a partial term does not count as one of the consecutive terms.
So my month doesn't count.
Okay. Other thoughts
On the manual in general?
on the manual in general?
Okay. Yeah, I do have a question. On page 20, contact with candidates, I understand that provision and exactly why it's in there. But the question that I have is, I didn't find anything in here in regards to, say, a current licensee comes to you as a board member and asks you to bring something to the board or something like that. Is that prohibited? Or how would that process work?
Trish?
That does happen, and I would think we would treat that as a public comment, and then we could either decide as a committee to discuss it, or if supported, if there was enough information, we could discuss it before the meeting and determine whether or not it could be on the agenda. I would treat it as a public comment.
And those items will be placed on our next agenda. I'm looking at Tara. And so that public would be noticed, and then we would have an open discussion on that.
Okay.
And I think the issue of the initial licensure was one of those that was brought to us as a public comment that we decided to put on the agenda and talk about.
And sometimes the public may have issues that they email us, and they will copy some of the members, and we do try to resolve those and may not necessarily come directly to the committee.
Okay. Tara?
I have one recommended technical change on page 10 on the section of out-of-state travel. There's a citation to Government Code Section 11139.8 subdivisions B1 and 2. I would recommend striking the S from the end of subdivision, because really it's only one subdivision, B, and then there are paragraphs 1 and 2.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Would we like to make a motion to approve this with the changes recommended?
Real quick question.
Sure.
Right when I got on the board, there was a governor bill that came out about that a board had to have 50% women. Is that something that would be also in our manual, or is that just because it was the bigger, broader thing?
I don't think that bill was signed by the governor last year,
Okay.
but I can get back to you with a definite answer.
And I think we're a committee, not a board, so the board might have to be, but the committee might not fall into that.
I think the bill, the legislation defined it as maybe state agencies, which would include, but let me check on the status of that, and I will get back to you.
Okay.
2.5.
Yeah. Are we prepared to make a motion to approve this with the recommended changes by Tara? We have 2 changes recommended.
I'll make a motion that the committee approve the LATC member changes to the administrative manual, including the 2 citations by our attorney.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the manual as presented with 2 separate change items that were identified by Ms. Welch. Additional comments or thoughts by the committee? Public comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Mark Trescott,
Yes.
Andrew Bowden, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, the manual is approved with the appropriate changes. Next item. Item K, review and discuss requirements of landscape architects for qualified stormwater pollution prevention plan developer, QSD certification. Trish?
Okay, so the LATC received correspondence from a licensee inquiring if LATC provided the QSD training program, which we do not. But we researched more about the training and the question, and what's presented to you here is a little background regarding the process to become QSD certified. The State Water Board, as part of its construction general permit, includes a training and certification requirements, and the permit requires that a QSD possess one of 8 underlying professional licenses listed within, one of which is a landscape architect. And as part of that training, certain professions then are required to take and pass the QSD exams. And then we researched further and found that as of September, there are approximately 87 landscape architects currently QSD certified. So after talking it over with the chair, we thought this would be information to share with the committee to discuss. No action is requested. It's just it's for informational purposes only.
Okay, thoughts by the committee? Any thoughts, comments? Unfortunately, the individual wasn't able to make it. He had hoped that he would. And I did see him the other evening, and he mentioned that actually he had sat for the QSD exam, and his thoughts have changed or altered a little bit. And I didn't know exactly how or where I was hoping he'd be here. But anyways, I welcome thoughts.
Mr. Chair? Well, it sounds to me as though there's already a mechanism by which somebody could become qualified. So I'm not really sure that, there's any action that we need to do other than just, I think, though, that this is one of those areas that we might want to see if we can get included into the CSE. So that, if we're already saying that a landscape architect is able to take the training to become certified, that then we should probably be testing for it. At least that's my thoughts on it.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have to agree with Andy. I think it's definitely something, just in general, it would be nice to understand the content of the supplemental exam, because I'm not real familiar with what we are testing, so I'm real curious to kind of go through this whole process.
Go ahead, Susan.
Although it was over some years ago when I helped, I don't remember it, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I don't remember it being a question. I will say that as a landscape architect that does habitat restoration, large projects, you have to understand this, because your planting plan, I've seen people put crepe myrtles in a storm swale, and you're kind of like, well, wait a minute, or a bioretention, and you're kind of like, well, is that really going to be able to grow there? And so having some basic knowledge on a test question, that would be a perfect question, is like what trees or plants can go into these bioretention basins. So I agree with the 2 comments already.
Right, and that's regarding the CSE, our state supplemental exam. Okay, great. John?
I guess my question would be, the way that these regulations are now set up, that landscape architects, even though they're aware of this, they're not, unless they're certified, they cannot perform this work. Is that correct? As part of their normal practice?
I think honestly, I think it depends on the jurisdiction, and the agency you're working with. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just basing it on my own practice.
I thought you did have to sign, somebody has to sign the drawings for the calculations, as far as I knew. Is that your case, Mark? And
In the past,
you have been able
I
to
have done
sign?
stormwater plans.
Okay. And the reason why I ask this, and it's going to go off on a tangent, but with the recent, this whole recent legislation about what constitutes a contractor versus an employee or whatever, if this is a normal area of practice for landscape architects, in regards to any project that you're going to do, if it requires a storm management plan, then somebody's got to prepare that. And if we have to be hiring somebody because we're not qualified to perform this work or sign off on it in any way, then that potentially has some ramification on whether or not, whoever you're having do this work is going to be considered an employee of your firm or what. And I guess another question that I would have would be, you mentioned it depends on which jurisdiction you're working in. That would raise concerns for me, because then that means whatever the regulations are, they're not being applied, equally across all jurisdictions in the state. And that raises, a whole separate set of problems.
Okay?
Response? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Susan.
On the page 1 of 2, item K, midway down under the second paragraph, right after the whole brackets of who's allowed to perform this work, it does say after the bracket, and have attended a Stormwater Board sponsored or approved QSD training program. So there is something beyond us just being licensed. I'm not sure what the extent of the training program is, but it does say that. It's about halfway down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks like the 10th line. There's 2 words erosion on 2 sentences before it. The bracket ends at that line, and then it added attended a approved class training.
Okay, any other comments? I have a question to the committee. How would you like to proceed with this? Would you like to see a presentation from someone about this program to understand more? Are you comfortable with where it's at and how it applies to landscape architects in the state right now? Thoughts?
I would like a little more information on it. Yeah, if we could have someone come in and present, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
Because-
I was just going to say, I think because this is such an important part of our practice that we need to be very clear on exactly where we stand on this.
Right, and how landscape architects can participate legally and what they may need to do to participate more or less. Susan?
And if we do add questions to our exam, how does that relate to this requirement of having to take a class of training?
Right.
Yeah, I would love to see them come back.
Okay, okay, so we'll work with staff on figuring out, the best course of action, but we'll look to have a presentation to this group on this, this program in general, and with an emphasis maybe on how landscape architects currently interact with it.
Okay,
Trish?
that sounds fine.
Okay. Okay. If there isn't anything else on this, are there any public comments on this issue? No? Okay. Well, we're going to take a 30-minute break for lunch. Our lunch is here. We're going to take 30 minutes. We're a little ahead of schedule, which is great. So we'll resume at 12 noon. Resuming our meeting, we're on to,
the audience to keep
Yeah, where's the
because they're a little noisy out there.
yeah, we lost our public. Anyways, we're on to item L, discuss some possible action on new LATC logo. Miss Trish, will you please take this over?
Okay, so to provide some background, the board has a new logo. In January of earlier this year, the executive committee reviewed two logos, presented it to the board, and they have DCA, what is it? Office of Publications Design and Editing created their logo. And so what we're presenting to the board is their last letterhead, which really wasn't a logo, it was just the state seal, the samples that were provided to the board, and their final logo decision, and asking if the LATC would also like to consider updating our logo, and if so, what methodology you'd like to pursue, if you'd like DCA to go ahead and create a sample for us, or as designers, if you'd like to submit some suggestions, or another thought maybe to invite students if we decide to change the logo, so.
Thank you. Committee member questions, comments, thoughts? Please go ahead, Susan.
Is there a question I haven't commented on yet? Sorry. I think it would be great to have students. I still don't know what the dots and the squares and the curve, is there a meaning behind our previous logo?
Oh, you're talking about our current logo?
Yeah, current.
I don't think we have anybody here who was involved in that decision. It's been around for a while, so.
So we don't know what it
Current logo.
means.
I was not here.
No.
Well, I know there's the whole thing of the grid of 9 squares. You guys know about that? But we're missing one of the 9. And then the dots and the circles, it seems kind of interesting, like it may want to be more geared towards what we do. So I would love to see a student competition.
Okay, other thoughts?
Yeah, I think we could have something that represents us a little bit better. So I'm good with going with the student. Do you want to expand on that? Like if we do use students, I guess that's just up to Trish, you would organize that and everything?
So I might be getting a little ahead, but if we do have our meeting, say at one of the programs, such as Southwestern College, which we were planning to do last year, we can reach out to those students specifically, since they may be there to present it, and we could also send out to other students, the nearby students that might want to present designs. We could also combine and also consider student designs along with designs that DCA may have for us as well.
Laura, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but can you talk about the process with the board and kind of just how you went about it? Because you're working with a bunch of designers, and sometimes that's challenging.
Yeah, I was overly optimistic about the process. It was right after I started, I did an onboarding with the DCA communication staff, and they mentioned that they have all the logos of the boards on the wall, and they mentioned that ours hadn't been updated in a while, so I thought it was a good opportunity to use our DCA services that we pay for, and so they designed a couple, and I brought it to the executive committee, and those 3 members talked about it for over an hour, and back and forth, and went back for some revisions, and then presented it to the full board and had quite a robust discussion. It was not unanimous, but the board did finally vote for a logo. But they did have a lot of discussion about what was represented for the board, leaving out the logo, and kind of, they compared to all the different logos amongst the boards, because they do vary. Some are more literal, like the medical board and contractors board, and then landscapes is not as literal. So, yeah, it was interesting, but I enjoyed working with DCA. I thought their staff did a really good job, came up with some good ideas.
So you made comment about the services that we do pay for. So technically, we pay for services through DCA, which we could draw upon. We would not need a separate contract for them to provide us with alternatives.
Right. So we fund DCA through pro rata services, and part of that is the public affairs communication staff. So the work that they do for us, in that regard, wouldn't be extra.
Okay.
But it was good, and I think the board members enjoyed the discussion, even if we weren't unanimous in the vote.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I just have a question. The last time, whenever it was that we came up with the current logo, is there any way to go back and see what other alternatives might have been done at the time? And if those records or files even exist still anymore?
I can try and research to see if there's anything.
Okay.
And what it means. Your lights on.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm hearing is a general consensus. Yeah, it's time to update this logo. Let's please do something. Yes, we're interested in maybe involving students. And yes, I'm interested in having DCA pitch in some thoughts too. What would we like to do? Would we like to have staff generate a proposed program? Trish, do you feel like you could speak to that right now? What I'm thinking is a proposed program for doing this effort with some dates and some strategies for garnering different alternatives for us to review.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Maybe before we kind of go down that road, if I can just make one comment, though. It doesn't matter to me, what logo we use or how we go about getting the logo. I mean, obviously, I think the logo we have now is kind of dated, and we can certainly refresh that and come up with something. My only comment is that I would like to see it be representative of what it is we do. Now, I know the California Architects Board, they've come up with something that's, very, I don't know what would be the right term for it is, but it's very modern, but it doesn't necessarily say architects, doesn't say, it's distinctive in its way, but I don't think you look at it and think that it says architects. So here's an opportunity, and I certainly don't think that our current logo that the LATC has says anything about landscape architecture. But what I would like to see us do is maybe not do something that one of the professional organizations did. They spent $150,000 to come up with a new logo that is very similar to their old logo. And so I was like, well, there was a good use of our $150,000.
Oh, my God.
So, the thing is, if we're going to go through this exercise, I think it needs to be something that is worthwhile doing. I support, having the students, maybe it's a competition, maybe there's some enumeration or some dollars that could be provided either to assist with them coming up with their concepts or as a prize, if you want to call it a prize, or a scholarship for the winning entry, something along that line. I would like to see what DCA, what they might come up with, and so we can maybe merge the two possibly. Anyway, that's just my comment.
Which is the new one?
But I've got, that's the new one, and this was the old one.
He's handing American Society of Landscape Architect pens with the new and old logo on them.
I was trying not to use names because
I'm
I didn't
so
want
sorry.
to, I didn't want to slander anybody or.
The prize could be we pay their license exam. The extra $200.
Well, it would have to be budgeted, and that's a whole nother thing. We can explore that issue. Maybe it can be private donation to LATC that then can be, we'll figure that out. Anyways,
And I think you can provide DCA's staff as much feedback as you want. I didn't give them a whole lot when they designed the Architects Board logo, but if you have more involvement or more ideas, suggestions for them, that they're definitely open to that.
correct me if I'm wrong, Trish, really, you really wanted to put this out to say, hey, do we want to really even do this?
Right. Take a look at, since the board really has just done this, take a look at our current logo, and it's a good opportunity for us to, given the time that it's been there, consider if we want to update our logo, and then the means in which we'd like to do that.
Okay. And if I may speak for the committee, what I'm hearing is, yes, please, let's go through a process of updating this. And we've given some input as to some of the parameters and our interests in what we do. I do think at this point, it'd be great to give staff some time to think about maybe the process to come back to us. Is that dragging this out too far? Or does the group feel confident, yeah, let's invite all the students in all the different programs in California and invite DCA, and we're just going to bring alternatives? Thoughts? Do you have thoughts, Trish?
Well, with your permission, we could just, we could explore it on our own, and if we have interest from any of the sources or pathways that we look into, we can just go ahead and pursue everything that we find, or within reason, I guess, and then present those back to the committee at our next meeting.
Okay, if I may suggest, I'd love for the committee, I'm looking at Tara, to be able to provide written thoughts as to parameters or input or thoughts about what the logo should or shouldn't be. Is that, we don't have a problem with direct communication from committee member to staff, hey, this is what I think about the logo, to get them started.
I think that's fine, and I think I would recommend a follow-up summary of the comments received by staff from the members so that the public's aware of, what the
process.
deliberation was, right?
Okay.
Yeah, just the point is that it can't be a group email.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very much. So Trish, I just want to provide a little input opportunity, more so than this in the open meeting, is so that the committee can take a little more time to think about it, maybe 2 weeks or something to get comments, no group emails, directly to Trish, just thoughts, so
Okay.
that you'll have something to work with staff as parameters,
That sounds great.
okay?
Yeah, we can
And
do
hopefully
that.
it's not
Yep.
pointing in two different directions, but,
Okay. We
will
can
that
do
be helpful?
Mhm, very,
And then we'll have a report back from staff at our next meeting.
right,
And it may or may not include concepts.
correct.
Okay. Is the committee okay with that direction?
Yes.
Do
Susan?
we need a motion?
Yeah, do we?
No, I don't think we do. We're not expending any money, or we're setting an agenda item for the next meeting, which then we could have public input on. No? Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We can provide negative and positive feedback, correct?
Yes,
Of
yeah,
what we
exactly.
don't want as well as what we
Yes.
want.
No, I think that's highly appropriate to give
Yeah.
staff the most parameters so they can hone their ask. And also when talking to DCA and their professional staff, you'll have some input.
Yes.
Okay. We're all good? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next issue, the next item. Election of 2020 LATC officers. Okay, so before we get started with this, Andy is on his grace period. And I think right now, I'm going to give you just a few moments if you'd like to say some things.
Yeah, I would. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure serving on this committee for all these years. I think I've been here for like 12 years, probably the oldest, or if not one of the oldest committee members since LATC was originally formed. But my tenure has come to an end, and as I'm in my grace period, it's at the governor's discretion as to when he appoints somebody else to sit in this seat. So it's very possible that this could be my last meeting. Not that I think that it is, but it's possible that it could be if he decided that he wanted to appoint somebody else. So I just wanted to thank all of you for the opportunity to serve, and just say that it's been a pleasure, and I've enjoyed serving on the LATC, and that I wish the LATC all the best wishes and continued success, because what you do here is very important, and I'd like to see it continue. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. Susan, did you want to say?
I've just enjoyed having you on here. I think you provide a lot of valuable history, having been involved for so long, but you also provide a lot of good comments.
Are you saying I'm old? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Ain't much behind you. No, I appreciate you have a lot of positive or real good critical comments on what we talk about, and I think you've been an asset to our committee. And we hope you do get reappointed. At least I.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'm not seeking reappointment to this committee, but I hope to be appointed to another committee, or another board, so we'll see how that works.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andy. Now, for myself, too, my term is up at the end of June, and I think previously announced that I was planning on just stepping away. I've reconsidered that, especially with Andy, potentially leaving. I think it'd be nice to have a little continuity, so I'm very comfortable doing my grace period, year grace period, if that's what it is. It's going to be at the governor's. I'm also a governor appointee, so it's at his discretion in terms, once I get into that grace period, whether or not I leave and when I leave, but it's my intention to serve the full term, the year, if necessary. And with that said, I am very comfortable and open to continuing as chair. It's up to the group whether or not they want a chair that could get bounced, in the term, but there are mechanisms for dealing with that too. So I just wanted to throw that on the table, that plan on being around for a little while until we get someone, provide some continuity. And I'm also comfortable staying in this seat if that's what the group wants. Okay, so at this point, we want to elect a chair and a vice chair, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
Comments, thoughts?
I'll make a recommendation that you do continue. So I guess I'm nominating you as chair.
Okay,
I second.
I accept that. Are there any other nominations for chair? Anybody? John? Okay. Okay, we'll need a roll call on this.
Mark Trescott,
Yes.
Andy Bowden, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a chair for the next term. Vice chair.
I'd like to nominate John.
I'll second that nomination. John?
I accept.
Are there any other?
I didn't mean to laugh at you, I was just, you get it?
Any other nominations? Okay. Since we don't have public, I haven't asked for public input, so roll call, please.
Mark Trescott,
Yes.
Andy Bowden, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Aye.
Okay, so we have our officers for next year. Excellent. Thank you guys very much. Next item, review of future LATC meeting dates, excuse me, not dates.
Did I put it on there?
No, this is the old one. This is the, yeah, okay.
So I sent out a poll to the members, and we kind of have a rough idea of the weeks, and talked with Mark and narrowed down a couple of future meeting dates for the upcoming year, the first being February 5th, and the next one, May 27th. We're considering having the first one at UC Davis and have reached out to them. And then trying to revisit, since we had to rearrange our schedule with Southwestern Community College last year, possibly having the May 27th meeting there. So you could,
Any thoughts or comments about the schedule and those meeting locations? John?
I support both of those suggestions, and what I will do is I'll get in touch with the people at Southwestern College and see when their term actually ends to make sure that it's not after, the proposed date is after they,
Okay. we
yeah.
could flip the locations too, so
Okay,
that we could still
yeah.
go there.
okay, yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
but
I'm sorry,
UC
UC Davis will be in session in May.
Okay.
They wrap up their academic calendar in June, so maybe we might consider just
Okay.
doing that straight up that way.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll plan on that. switch locations.
Okay.
Okay?
And the dates are good with everyone?
I got a question about the Washington DC. Is that, that's the in-between week?
That's the week after,
What's the,
the
is
11th,
that?
I believe. Yeah,
Yeah, is that something that's been approved yet, or?
we're working on that,
Okay.
training. Mhm.
In Washington DC?
It's sponsored by NCARB.
Okay. Okay, is there anything else with that, Trish?
Not for that specifically.
Okay.
I was going to mention the upcoming board meeting on December 11th in Los Angeles.
Right. Do,
Whereabouts in Los Angeles?
Andy,
gonna be-
are you available to cover
East-
that?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to be available on the 11th, so
Okay.
I can't do
What day
it.
of the week is that?
That's a, I think it's a Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday.
December 11th, Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay. I can tentatively.
Okay, so Patricia, you can tentatively cover
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
And where is it?
East Los Angeles Community College? Is that right?
Yes, starting 9:30.
Okay,
We'll send you the
okay. East Los Angeles.
Okay,
I need to find it.
anything else on the calendar? One thing that is on our calendar, it's Ms. Patricia Trouth's birthday today, so I want to wish her a happy birthday on public record, webinar, public record.
Strike that from the minutes, please.
Let's make sure that she gets a gold star next to her name for coming to a LATC meeting on her birthday.
Well done.
Definitely. Happy birthday.
Okay, is there anything further to come before us? Public? Okay, I'm going to consider this meeting adjourned, 12:23 PM.